Hello, BookTube. We're continuing on with our read-along of the Illearth War, which is the second volume in the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever by Stephen R. Donaldson. This is a read-along I'm doing with a group of other BookTubers, and we are reading each of the first 6 Covenant books from July until December. And all of them, they're all doing one video a month. I prevailed upon them to let me do just a normal read-along on this channel where we break it up into quarters and just read through the book for a little more detail. Though their videos have been great so far and will be again, because we're coming up on I don't know what day today. I don't know what the date on the calendar is, but we're coming up on more Covenant videos from my colleagues on this read-along. But we are doing a read-along of the Illearth War, just page by page. And this is the story of a man named Thomas Covenant, who comes from our ordinary world of TVs and radio and cars and whatnot, and who is a successful author who develops leprosy. And he pays no attention to it at first, so it worsens bad enough for him to lose 2 fingers on one hand. And once it's arrested, his wife leaves him. She takes their young son, and he becomes embittered and also becomes an outcast from the little town where he lives. They don't want him coming into town to pay his bills or collect his groceries or anything like that. And that sets him to rebel. And in Lord Foulsbane, the first book in the series, he goes into town to pay a bill, and it appears that a police car is driving straight at him, and he loses consciousness. And when he wakes up, he is in a fantasy world called the Land, which is ruled over by sorcerers, staff-wielding sorcerers along the line of Tolkien, called the Lords of the Land, and they are at a gigantic stone keep called Revelstone, and they have been forever in combat with a nefarious entity very much like Sauron called Lord Foul. And it's been a losing fight. Foul is much more powerful than they are. Their only source of defense, their only sustenance, has been the wards of High Lord Kevin Landwaster, a lord of Revelstone from 1,000 years before, who contended with Lord Foul and eventually reached a point where he decided on the ritual of desecration. That the only way that I'm going to have a chance of destroying Lord Foul is to destroy the land as well. And he took precautions ahead of time before he did that. Kevin did. He broke his great store of magic into 7 wards of power and distributed them, hid them, so that no one would be able to come across them who wasn't ready for them. You would find the first ward, which he gave to the giants, this enormous race of humanoid beings who live in the far east of the land, where they settled when they came from across the ocean in the east. He gives the first ward to them and asks them to go home to their shoreside village, to Sea Reach, and come back when the desecration is over. He also sends his immortal bodyguards, the Blood Guard, who are a race of unarmed men who come from the mountains and who swore a mystic vow on the earth power of the land to protect the lords of Revelstone. And their vow is so strong that they don't age, they don't sleep, they don't use weapons, but they're extremely effective. And he sends the Blood Guard away as well, Kevin does, and they trust him. They don't have any idea what he's planning. And he enacts the ritual of desecration 1,000 years ago, and it doesn't kill Lord Foul. It kills everything else, almost. But it doesn't kill Lord Foul. It pairs him back quite a bit. It sends him back, to his fastness in the east, a little bit to the south of where the giants are on the shore. And gradually the land recovers. Gradually it recovers. And the people of the land, including the lords, swear an oath of peace, specifically so that they will never be tempted to desecration again. And gradually everything returns. The Blood Guard return and redouble the intensity of their vow to protect the lords, since they have failed once. The giants return and bring with them the first ward of High Lord Kevin's lore. And in the course of Lord Foulsbane, the novel that we read last time, the quest that Thomas Covenant joins when he is summoned to the land, mystically summoned there, finds the second ward of High Lord Kevin's lore. So the lords are gradually building on their knowledge. Also, when they go on that quest, they also recover an item of extreme mystical power called the Staff of Law, which was hewn from the one tree, and which now the lords possess. They now have the Staff of Law and the second ward of High Lord Kevin's lore. But it isn't enough. It's more than they've ever had, but it's not enough to defeat Lord Fowl, who they can easily tell is amassing an army in the east. And that worries them. Also, the fact that they haven't heard from the giants in years worries them. And it worries them enough so that High Lord Elena, the leader of the lords at Revelstone, uses the Staff of Law to summon Thomas Covenant to the land again. And we learn something that was hinted at the end of Lord Fowl's Bane, which is that time passes much more quickly in the land than it does in our world. 40 years have passed. And Covenant still doesn't want to be there. He's a leper. As far as he's concerned, he has to concentrate solely on his own leprosy, or his disease will kill him. He thinks the land is a dream, designed in just a product of madness, of his frustration in our world. And that certainty is undercut just a bit in this visit, because he meets someone who's also from our world, a man named Hile Troy, who is blind, but who was in our world, despite his blindness, a very good and useful tactician and strategist for the Department of Defense, until he is trapped by a fire in the building where he is at the time and almost dies, and is summoned to the land he's told he's summoned by an adept who dies in the attempt. But one way or another, Hile Troy is part of the land. He is not going back to our world. His summoner died. And in the land, the person who is summoned is co-joined with the person who summons them. If that person is still alive, they will stay in the land. If that person dies, then the summons is over and you revert back to your own world. Hile Troy is stuck in the land, and he thinks that he can save it from Lord Fowl without any kind of mysticism, and also without the power of Thomas Covenant's white gold wedding ring. Another explicit echo of Tolkien is that there's one ring. There's a ring that is actually a danger to Lord Fowl, because in the land there is no white gold, and white gold is the center of wild chaos magic that could destroy Lord Fowl if Thomas Covenant had any idea how to use it. He doesn't. But Troy believes that he can save the land without any of that. He believes that he can save it militarily, using features of the geography of the land that are laid out in the map at the beginning of each of these novels. We get a map of the land. And you refer to this, in Illearth War, you refer to this map all the time, because this is a book at least as much about Hile Troy as it is about Thomas Covenant. This is about Hile Troy's plan to militarily defeat Lord Fowl, using the terrain of the land to his advantage. Troy takes other precautions. He wants to make the most use of the Bloodguard. He wants to make the most use of the Lords and their mystical abilities. And he also sends an embassy to Seareach. He sends an embassy, a dangerous embassy, because it's skirting not only Lord Fowl's own domain, but also the great swamp of Sarengrave. He sends an embassy to the giants to find out what's wrong, to find out what has gone wrong. Why haven't we heard from you? And the whole time that we see him in this book, up until the point we're reading now, in his weaker moments, he's kind of daydreaming about phalanxes of armed giants coming to the relief of the land. And there is a theme that runs throughout these books. It's not particularly subtle, but Donaldson does a good job with it, which is that Lord Fowl isn't just evil. He subverts people. He doesn't just, wahaha, do evil things. He makes people betray themselves right along the lines of their own strength. Covenant sees this about him right away. We suspect probably because Covenant is a lot like him. And he's forever warning the Lords. He's going to use everything that you think is best about you to hurt the very land that you want to protect. And same thing with everyone else. He's going to use your psychology to make your defeat all the more galling. And the Lords don't listen, or if they listen, they don't act on it. What choice do they have? As far as they're concerned, Covenant has the white gold. As far as Hile Troy is concerned, you have to fight. You can't just give up. You can't be a slave to Lord Fowl, like so many of the perverted creatures that serve him are. And those perverted creatures are perverted by an extra ill. Lord Fowl, in addition to his own mystical ability, has something called the Illearth Stone, that is a great bane, a bane of great evil that allows its holder to warp and dominate the natures of other living things. And what we learn in the beginning of the Illearth War is staggering in its implication, which is that Lord Fowl has so much command over the Illearth Stone that he has chipped it into pieces and still retained control over it. And we learn this in the most disheartening way, because the word comes to the lords at Revelstone that Lord Fowl is on the march, that the war that Hile Troy has been preparing for is now finally here. And leading that army is a giant. And this seems unbelievable to the lords and to the Bloodguard, who the giants are beings of amazing connection to this earth power of the land. It seems impossible that a giant could ever serve Lord Fowl. It seems impossible even that the Illearth stone could make one serve Lord Fowl. And there's a reason why it's happening. Because in addition to the Illearth stone, the giant leading Fowl's army is also possessed by a raver. There are 3 disembodied spirits who were once kept in check in the far east of the land by the Forestalls, by the great forest of the land itself. The land apparently once upon a time was covered in immensely strong and powerful forests, and there were Forestalls. Think human versions of Tolkien's Ents. Spirits of the forest, guardian spirits of the forest, who roamed those forests and who protected the upper land from Lord Fowl and his ravers. And the Forestalls hate ravers and are their natural enemies. But slowly, over time, humans in the land quarried the forests, knocked them down, burned the logs, used them for homes and ships and whatnot, until finally the collective power of the old forest to hold back the ravers was broken. It wasn't anything dramatic. It just happened because of deforestation. And the Forestalls retreated to the various big forests of the land. You can see those black spots are forests, including this big one down at the bottom here. And when they retreated, the ravers suddenly had free reign over the upper land. And as a result, this giant that is leading Fowl's army is not only coerced by the Illearth stone that he holds in his hand, the fragment of it, but he's also possessed of a raver. This is extremely disheartening for the lords. And the only glimmer of hope that they have in all of this is that during their deliberations at Revelstone, a strange being appears, a being who seems like a boy. He's wearing a light tunic, he has floppy curly hair, but it's easy to see that he is not either a boy or young or particularly human. His name is Amok, and he is a doorway, a relic of High Lord Kevin, who sensed just the right triggering mechanism that he would need to come to Revelstone and make himself known to the lords. And when he does that, the lords, in all honesty, have to inform him that the triggering mechanism was an accident. That they don't know what they're doing, in other words, and that they haven't mastered enough of Kevin's lore to summon him legitimately. At which point, Amok disappears. He says, I've misserved my purpose, and he vanishes. The lords get a tiny hint of the kind of power that might be enough to help them against Lord Fowl, and then that help disappears. In the chapters that we're reading today, Amok reappears. Our heroes have moved on. They are traveling away from Revelstone. They are going to war. When Amok reappears and says that he has journeyed far and wide in the land, he's a mystical being. He doesn't need horseback and can travel far faster than a flung arrow. And he has seen the need of the land. He's seen that Lord Fowl is grown strong again. He's seen that everything that Kevin valued is in peril. And judges that if he can be of help to the lords, he will. But he is made in such a way that he can't simply give them help. They have to ask him the right questions. They have to get that help out of them. And they don't know how to do it. And eventually, out of sheer luck, they determine, and Amok confirms, that his goal, the essence of his being, is to lead them to one of the most powerful wards of High Lord Kevin's lore. He is a doorway to that lore. And that decides High Lord Elena, that she's just one extra lord in the fight against Lord Fowl on the battlefield. Yes, she has the Staff of Law, but she's just one person. Whereas, if she were to go with Amok into the high mountains that he gestures at, and were to find that ward of Kevin's lore, she might hold the turning point of the whole war in her hands. And she judges that it is a good mission to go on. And so, the narrative splits. Hile Troy and Lord Moram and all of the warward, all of the soldiers and the warriors, almost all of the lords at Revelstone, all go to war. They march south. They go on Hile Troy's elaborate plan. He has sent a detachment of his armed forces ahead of time to lure Foul's army to a natural bottleneck in the mountains where he will plant an ambush. And he and the lords head in that direction, whereas High Lord Elena and Thomas Covenant and Amok and 2 of the Bloodguard, the Bloodguard assigned to protect Elena, and Banner, the Bloodguard assigned to protect Thomas Covenant, that party heads off into the mountains in search of High Lord Kevin's ward. And the chapters that most of the chapters that we're reading today, we are reading from let's see here, the chapter Runnick's Tale, or Revelwood, all the way to Lena's Daughter. And that takes us all the way through part 2 of the Illearth War and gets us 1 chapter into part 3. And the parts are split by narrative focus. So for most of the chapters that we're reading today, Covenant is not in the book. We're following Hile Troy and Lord Moram as they go to war. And it's a very interesting narrative device that Donaldson uses, because he not only splits the narrative, but unlike Tolkien, he gives each narrative its own dramatic arc and its own dramatic climax. And each narrative thread is only vaguely aware of the other. At one point in each of the narrative threads, that narrative looks at the other, feels a distant tremor of the other, but only at one point. Otherwise, we're allowed to completely lose ourselves in the story of the military war against Lord Foul. And that is rare. That is a very interesting thing. I think that's where this book comes into its own, is that Donaldson not only lays out all of these ideas in this fantasy epic, but then turns around to interrogate them. He's told us that Hile Troy is a master tactician and has been put in charge of the Lord's military defenses, and now he shows us that. He shows us what's at stake, how that works, and whether or not it will succeed. And it gets pretty bad. It gets pretty bad. At one point, Hile Troy decides that he has to go to Kevin's Watch. He has to go to the highest point anywhere near him so that he can see Lord Foul's army. I said he was blind, but when he comes to the land, the healing properties of the land, although they don't restore his eyes, do give him a kind of mental vision. And that mental vision can see much farther than the normal vision of everyone else in the land. So Hile Troy knows that if he gets high enough up, he will be able to simply look across a vast amount of distance and see Lord Foul's army. And so he and Lord Moram and a couple of other people climb Kevin's Watch, which is where we first meet Covenants, where he first comes to the land. And it's still nighttime. And Hile Troy's vision is no use in the night. He has to wait for dawn. But before dawn comes, someone comes. A Bloodguard comes. A Bloodguard who was part of that mission to go to Sea Reach and see what happened to the giants. And who has a story to tell. And when Hile Troy first sees that Bloodguard and knows who it is, he blurts out, "How far behind are they? How close are they?" And then we get the horrible, horrible story of what happens to the giants in this book. And it is a perfect example, a horrifying, but a perfect example of Donaldson's characterization of Lord Foul as someone who doesn't just beat you, he perverts you. He uses your own dreams to defeat you. The giants are a long-lived people. They have been exiled on the land for a long time. They yearn to go home, and they want children. They are long-lived people, but they don't breed quickly. They don't have many children. And when the Bloodguard and the one Lord of Revelstone, Lord Hiram, who is still alive, make it to Sea Reach, they learn the horrible truth of what has happened to the giants. There were triplets born, and they were possessed by ravers. A raver and a fragment of the Illearth stone were enough to do that. And the one grown giant baby who stays behind at Sea Reach starts killing his fellow giants. And those giants in Sea Reach, in the vineyards, in the villages, on the dockyards, are so desolated by the fact that the thing they most dreamed of, children, has been turned against them, that they just go home and wait for this raver-possessed giant to come and kill them. It's an eerie, eerie scene that the Bloodguard relates at the top of Kevin's watch. The story that's related is that as they get closer and closer to the inner parts of the city, the blood around the dead giants is fresher and fresher because the killer is still at work in Sea Reach. He's still killing people. They're that close to having got there in time. And they get there. They reach the end. They reach the heart of Sea Reach, right by the docks, right by the great quays where the ships are docked. And they find a living giant, the father of the triplets, who's been left alone. He's been left until last. He's still alive. He's not possessed. He's just sitting there, lost in despair, waiting for death to come to him. And the Bloodguard, of course, have only one question. Why did you not fight? They ask this question, and it is going to be so important later in this book. At first, Lord Hiram, the Lord of Revelstone, says, "Why did you not flee?" And the giant says, "Some did, some 4 or 5 who did not know the long name of despair, or did not hear it. Or they were too much like him," the killer, in other words, to judge. "The ill of the Sarin grave took them. They are no more." Compelled by the ancient passion of the Bloodguard, Korik, one of the Bloodguard, asks, "Why did you not fight?" And the giant says, "We had become the thing we hate. We are better dead." And Korik's response is, "Nevertheless." Is the fealty of giants? Is this the fealty of giants? Does all promised faithfulness come to this? Oh, it's a little raver. Hi, baby. Hi, baby girl. Hi. Let me start over. Is this the fealty of giants? Does all promised faithfulness come to this? By the vow, giant, you destroy yourselves and let evil live? Even Kevin Landwaster was not so weak. A little bit of an inadvertent revelation there of what the Bloodguard think about Kevin Landwaster, and it comes to nothing. While they're talking to that giant, his possessed son shows up and kills him, and almost kills them. And he's going to destroy the home of the giants. He's going to destroy Sea Reach again with the ironic despoilment of Lord Fowl. He's going to use the ocean to do it. He's raising a gigantic wave to just crush the whole of Sea Reach. And Lord Hiram contends with this creature. He is badly overmatched, but he distracts the giant long enough for the Bloodguard to kill him, to kill the body. You can't kill the Raver. The Raver can vanish. But you can kill the giant. The giant is still flesh and blood, and 2 Bloodguard are easily enough to kill a giant. And once the giant is dead, once he drops the fragment of the Illearth stone that he's been holding, the wave dies. Lord Hiram is also dying. He has only minutes left to live. He tries to say, do not touch. But then he dies. And we, as readers of fantasy novels, know perfectly well that what he is trying to tell the Bloodguard is, don't touch the Illearth stone. But they don't know that. They've never read a fantasy novel in their lives. So they do. They gather it up to bring it to the Lords, because maybe the Lords can use it. But that is the story that this Bloodguard has to tell to Hile Troy, and he is devastated. So is everyone else. Not just that no giants are coming to their aid in their war against Lord Fowl, but that no giants live anymore. The giants of Sea Reach have been exterminated. That's bad enough. That's horrible, a blow. But then the sun comes up, and Hile Troy is able to see Lord Fowl's army. And he sees, when he looks at that army, the one thing that he had not calculated. He's calculated everything about the geography of the land, the nature of Lord Fowl's attacks on the Lords, the resources that he has at his disposal with the great horses of the Ranihin, or the Bloodguard, or his own warriors, or the Lords and their sorcery. There's one thing that he hasn't counted on. There's one thing that he didn't imagine. And that's the very thing that he sees. And we get a description of it. Let's see here. First of all, he learns when he looks out in the distance that the detachment that he sent off to hold Lord Fowl's army until that ambush was in place did not succeed. His lieutenant had been unable to gain the last day that the marchers needed. That's the first disappointment. There are many more to come. Yet even that was not the most crushing sight. Behind the wolves came the main body of Lord Fowl's army. This body was closer than the others to Kevin's watch, and Troy could see it with appalling clarity. The giant striding at its head was the least of its horrors. At the giant's back marched immense ranks of cave wights, at least 20,000 of the strong, ungainly rock dwellers. Behind them hurried an equal number of Erviles, loping on all fours for better speed. Through their ranks, hundreds of fearsome, lion-like griffins alternately trotted and flew, and after the demon-dim spawn came a seething, grim army so huge that Troy could not even guess at its numbers. Humans, wolves, Waynim, forest animals, creatures of the flat, all radiating the fathomless blood hunger which coerced them. Many myriad of warped, rabid creatures, the perverted handiwork of Lord Fowl and the Illearth stone. Most of this prodigious army had already crossed the Mythal River in pursuit of Hile Troy and his command, that detachment that Troy sends ahead of time. It moved with such febrile speed that it was little more than 3 days away from Doom's retreat, and it was so mighty that no ambush, however well conceived, could hope to stand against it. But there would be no ambush. The war did not know its own peril and would not reach the retreat in time. And Troy says, Hile Troy, he's the only one who can see this. Of course, the people who are with him on Kevin's watch can't see what he sees. And he just says over and over again, my God, what have I done? What have I done? At one point he says he did not understand how the despisers' army could be so big. It surpassed his most terrible nightmares. That is the crucial way in which Lord Fowl has perverted Hile Troy. Because Hile Troy, keep in mind, in our world was a trusted strategist, someone whose brilliance in planning battles won him advancement in the ranks, and when he goes to the land, it wins him advancement there as well. Hile Troy, who we hear mentioned in that excerpt, is an extremely experienced warrior in defense of the land. He was a character in Lord Fowl's Bane 40 years ago. He is not in command of the warlord because Hile Troy has surpassed him in the confidence of the lords as the man whose vision, ironically enough, can save them. And here it turns out all his planning is for nothing. The army that he has to fight is simply too big. And at first, it unhinges him. There's a little bit of an ambiguous moment where it looks like he might have tried to jump off Kevin's watch and kill himself, but the lords pull him back, and he regains his own sense of self. And after a desperate minute, realizes there is a way. But it is the most desperate ploy imaginable. It is the most desperate ploy imaginable. What his army has to do, and his army, keep in mind, has been force marching for days. They are a ragged end of their human endurance. What they have to do now is run for the last place in the world, in the land, where you would expect them to go. They have to run from here, which is where they were going to do their bottleneck, to here, to this great forest. And to one of its key locales in that forest, Garrotting Deep, which was mythology says that is where the old forestills of the old forest used to kill ravers. That was their execution spot for the flesh and blood vessels of ravers. The old forest now has for 1,000 years had a reputation as a place where people go and die. They go in and they don't come out again. The trees kill them. The the old forest has no love for anything that is even remotely humanoid, another explicit echo of Tolkien. And so when Hile Troy tells his men, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to lure Lord Fowl and his army right to the edge of that forest, and then we're going to dive into it. We're going to run into it for all we're worth. They think he's insane. They think he raves. They think he himself is possessed by a raver. At least they say that. But he has a plan. His desperate plan is that Lord Moram will use his sorcery to call forth Carol Wildwood, the last forestall of that forest, and tell that forestall, if you give us safe passage, an army led by a raver will follow us. And they are enemies to the land. If you give us safe passage, that army will think you don't exist anymore and that your forest is just a forest, and will enter your domain, in which case they will be yours. You can kill them. And Carol Wildwood accepts. He's not friendly at all to humans in any way, but he accepts. As he says that I have a particular hunger for ravens. That is actually the scene that we're seeing on the cover of this book. That is Carol Wildwood. And a mistake that a lot of people, when they first saw this book, that is not Thomas Covenant. That is Lord Moram, who has summoned the Forestall successfully, just in time, before the Troy's army is just annihilated. And so they run into the trees, and sure enough, the Lord Fowl's army follows. And there's a wonderful scene, probably six or seven paragraphs, where we see it from Lord Morham's point of view, where he is just taken out of human time. And he dimly senses they're moving through the forest. He and Troy and all of the men are moving through the forest much quicker than a horse could run, thanks to the magic of Carol, Wildwood, and the forest. But Morham can also sense, in addition to their own quick movement, this giant and his army are being destroyed. And sure enough, when they are deposited at the end of their wild ride through the forest at Garrotting Deep, the giant's body is hanging from a gallows, and all of his army has been destroyed. Morham is, of course, a little nervous and asks Carol Wildwood, what about the gem that the giant has? And Carol, the forest all, just negligently says, it was a great evil, I destroyed it. It's just that's the level of this being's power. And he accepted the deal to let Hile Troy's army go through his forest to kill a raver, but he also said he wanted a price, that he would ask a small price in return for it. And Hile Troy, when Carol Wildwood makes that request, keep in mind, Hile Troy can hear his men behind him being slaughtered, and says, anything, I'll do anything, I'll promise anything. And we are about to learn what that cost may be when the chapters that we're reading today come to an end, with Morham and Hile Troy and the Forestall seeing two people arriving from the foothills of the mountains in the map. And those two people are Banner and Thomas Covenant. And then, without any explanation for that, we then shift to part 3 of the book, which shifts the narrative focus away from the Lords and away from Hile Troy to Covenant and Banner and High Lord Elena and Amok up in the forest. And that is the chapter that we're ending on today. We're ending on the chapter called Lena's Daughter, in which, among other things, there are a couple of interesting things that happen. One of them is interesting in a very disturbing way. One of the things that is interesting for later in the book is that High Lord Elena reveals to Covenant that she has a fascination with High Lord Kevin Landwaster, that she honestly believes that if he could come back alive today in the present time of the land, he could destroy Lord Fowl easily. She says, Thomas Covenant, I believe that there is an immeasurable strength in the consummation of despair, strength beyond all conceiving by an unholocausted soul. I believe that if High Lord Kevin could speak from beyond the grave, he would utter a word which would unmarrow the very bones of Lord Fowl's despite. And Covenant tries to talk sense to her. He says, that's madness. Do you think that there's some existence after death is going to vindicate you after you've simply extirpated life from Earth? That was exactly Kevin's mistake, I tell you. He is roasting in hell. But she doesn't quite believe that. And the other revelation that happens in Lena's Daughter is that we can see beyond a shadow of a doubt that High Lord Elena is in love with Thomas Covenant. Starts to call him beloved. And his reaction is not what you would expect, considering that she is his daughter from an act of rape. It's just Donaldson just pushing the envelope of what is acceptable or not for this character to keep you reading. We'll get to it in our next read along, but Covenant and Elena is well, that's going to be the whole of what we read next time, because that is the rest of this book. We're going to finish the Illearth War next Sunday, so we're just going to read the rest of the book. It has one of my favorite scenes anywhere in the entire Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, but it also has a lot that's worth discussion, a lot that's kind of creepy. So we're going to wrap this up here. That is our third week read-along of the Illearth War. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you liked or didn't like about this explicit military stuff. It's what keeps me coming back to this book. That is the one of the strongest deviations that Donaldson does in this first trilogy from his obvious template of Tolkien, and I just can't get enough of it. I love it every time I read it. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now. That is our third read along of the Illearth War, and we will resume here next week to finish the book. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, Book 2.